How you doing there? Nice to
What's up, man?
nice to see you finally.
Yeah, likewise. How are you?
Pretty good, pretty good.
You're in Japan?
I'm in Japan. I'm in a town called Hachioji, which is in west of Tokyo, which is just down the street from Sagamihara. So when I heard about this incident, I thought it was very suspicious straight away, considering what's been happening in Japan for the last, say, 5 years, although, the last 100 years especially. But
All right. That'd be a great topic. Yeah, that's something I'm not too schooled on, so I'm sure you can enlighten me quite a bit.
Yeah, yeah. So I think a lot of the suspicion comes from timing, which is that recently the Japanese government has been trying to clamp down on tattoos. I know that's a strange place to start, but about a month
Okay,
ago,
are you recording?
yeah, I'm recording right now. Um, so
Okay, okay, cool. Go ahead.
yeah, so they were trying to clamp down on tattoos, saying you can only have a tattoo studio if you're a licensed doctor. Of course, no tattoo artists are actually
Oh,
licensed doctors. Lots of younger Japanese people are getting tattoos nowadays because it's kind of, the Western style. It's kind of cool. It's
mhm.
sexy, whatever. So that's one thing I already had in mind because some of my Japanese friends have tattoos and so on. And of course, the Fukushima Daiichi disaster and fallout is something that's on everybody's mind. So that was always in my mind as well. And then the fact that the medical marijuana thing has been kind of in the news because this Japanese man who was used to be a Michelin rated chef um, contracted cancer, some sort of bowel cancer, and he was treating himself with the cannabis oil, which is shown to be extremely effective. He found out from the internet. A 58-year-old guy, Yamamoto Misamitsu, and
Right.
that was a pretty big court trial here. And of course, they arrested him. They found the marijuana, all that, and there was a pretty big trial, which is going on in the public eye, where he was actually proving quite well in court that this was helping him get over his cancer. And of course, they took it away from him, and then he was literally dying in court trying to prove his case.
Mhm.
And of course, what's interesting is he died the day before this knife attack. So of course, all the news was centered on that, and no one, had the time or space to think about this court case anymore. So
Oh,
just
okay.
timing wise was really strange.
So you're saying it's a distraction, or it serves, I guess, multiple purposes?
It's just that one of these multiple purpose things that they do. They
Okay.
just kill 20 birds with one stone, kind of like in the 9/11-ish kind of way. Um,
I get you. Okay.
so what's interesting about this knife attacker is, of course, he's got this giant tattoo on his back of some Japanese demon, and apparently was smoking weed every day, and was complaining on Twitter about the Fukushima, fallout, the radiation, which of course a lot of Japanese people do in general. But that was kind of like killing multiple birds with one stones there, with the sort
Oh,
of
okay. So let me ask you this: since you're in Japan,
hmm,
and you've been there for a while, I guess. I take it.
yeah. Well, I usually come here for about 3 months at a time. This is my 12th
Okay.
time out here.
Okay. What is your? Let me ask you first about Fukushima because I saw a lot of things in the news that made me skeptical, not necessarily of everything, but the hype about it. What's your take on that? The atmosphere there about it?
Yeah, I mean, it was a particularly sort of devastating for Japanese people psychologically because they're very dedicated towards keeping everything clean and tidy, and of course radioactivity is something you can't see and is very extremely dirty but invisible. So that was a big blow, and of course it happened in Fukushima, which is the bread basket or aka rice basket of Japan. So that would be like you know very devastating to Japan, and the psychological effect of the actual earthquake itself because no time before that has anyone ever experienced a sort of vertical earthquake. Like it was the earth was going up and down like a jackhammer. This is never the case. It's always sideways. It's a swaying kind of motion. And so that led a lot of
Mhm.
people and scientists to be extraordinarily baffled about what kind of earthquake that could be. And the earthquake didn't take place in a place that earthquakes usually ever happen. So, and of course, as you might know, the whole Hawaii effect, which is, of course, in Hawaii, people were being ushered to the mountains to wait for this giant tsunami. Because, if you
Mhm.
drop a stone in water, it has ripples on both sides. So there's supposed to be a giant tsunami coming towards Hawaii. And you can see footage on YouTube of people escaping into the mountains in their cars
Mhm.
waiting for this giant wave to come. It never came. they had like a, like a half a foot wave, like just a real small one, which is physically impossible.
So, what do you make of that? You think that it was engineered by Western governments in some way?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, a lot of people are starting to believe that here too. I mean, even Nikola Tesla. I mean, back in the day, he accidentally set off an earthquake in his in his laboratory in New York City. Right? They kicked him out of his place because I don't know when it was, 1915. It was a long time ago, but he made an artificial earthquake right there. So I mean, imagine what they have now.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if you think there's any stagecraft and deception involved in this, though.
Definitely. I mean, it seems to be extraordinarily spurious, story. And then, where Japan is heading right now with his Abe, who was the previous prime minister, just won he got reinstated for a second term. Or is it third term? I don't even know. But he went about to appoint the new Tokyo governor is a very right-wing lady who supports like the sort of independence of the the JDSF, the Japanese military. And then he just yesterday or the day before appointed Inada as his defense minister, and she's really right wing, and so that's not good. That's like Trump winning the election and appointing I don't know who super right wing militaristic person to be the Secretary of Defense. So it's Japan seems to be heading in a very strange direction, and I think
Is, is this more amenable to Washington, the appointee that would be coming into Japan? This new woman?
Yeah, that's where it gets a little bit even more complex. I mean, do the Americans want Japan to go more independent with their military, or they want Japan to have to change the constitution? Because that's the thing, is they're trying to change Article 9 of the Constitution, which was imposed in 1945 when the Americans, allegedly won the war and came here, and so they would have to change their peacetime constitution to a sort of back to the 1930s wartime constitution, which would basically mean they would take part in UN and NATO wars in a very active role. Right now, they can only serve in a support role, like refueling and some humanitarian aid, allegedly. But if that changes, they could be, because they're like the third best equipped army in the whole world. I mean, if anybody had a war with Japan would wipe them out pretty quickly. And, people are saying, oh, should we allow Japan to have nuclear weapons or not? I think they've had nuclear weapons for a long time. It's a highly technologically advanced country. I mean, there's no way they don't have nukes. If the North Koreans have nukes, which, of course, both of us find very dubious, then Japanese definitely have them. In the same way the Israelis have them, but they're not admitting it either.
So you cut out a little bit there where you were saying that you think that the new president would be more amenable to Washington or not. I didn't catch that part.
Well, he's already good friends with Washington. I'm sure he's
right. And you were talking about the right-wing woman.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm sure they embrace her fully because Japan will be a great ally. They won't have to just rely on France and England to go into their new stupid wars. They can have this very high-tech, very well-trained military to go with them and be their new war buddies.
Gotcha. Okay. Now we saw that. I've been talking about in my Tragedy and Hope lectures, and the last one I did the section on Japan where he discusses the rise of the Zaibatsu, which is the cartels that kind of took over in the 30s and 40s, and that led to a lot more westernization. The process of westernization had already been happening, but it looks to me like all of the Western ideas were exported really to wreck Japanese culture. That's kind of been the work thesis that I've had. Maybe you take a different view, I don't know, but it looks like Japan is completely on board with the US and the New World Order, as far as I can tell.
Absolutely.
And from what you're saying, it sounds like the political shift is still going even worse in that direction in terms of NATO. But you also said you wanted to talk about all these stabbing things. I remember stabbings that were happening a few years ago.
Yeah.
In Japan. And you also enlightened me to things I didn't know, that apparently there's kind of a Korean upper class that kind of runs things in Japan. And presumably that's how Washington and NATO run Japan. Is that accurate?
That seems to be accurate. I mean, definitely after the war, certain whole sections of Tokyo were given over to rich Korean businessmen, which seemed
Right.
really strange, and certain people
Right.
complain about to this day. And definitely, of course, the Japanese royal family is actually of North Korean descent,
Oh, okay.
which they admitted. People had known for a while, but they admitted in the early 2000s. And so that's kind of like you having, the English royal family actually being German. It's very, very similar. You know, um,
Right. Good point.
they're their worst enemies, but actually they're directly descended from their worst enemies. So it does seem a bit strange. You know,
Right.
so
Dubious.
it's definitely
So
the case that there's lots of, very powerful Koreans in Japan. A fair amount of the yakuza, the organized crime,
right.
is Korean. I mean, partly that's just because they'll admit anyone. You're dealing in organized crime, so it doesn't really matter what background you're from. Um, I'd say though the most powerful people in Japan are definitely Japanese. The most powerful family is surely the imperial family, who are ironically of North Korean descent, partially.
Okay. Quigley argues that the big names that we might recognize from technology and maybe motor corporations, Mitsubishi, right? That these families basically took control back then, and that they were the dominant cartels, and that they kind of consolidated power over time into smaller and smaller monopolies. Is that still the case? You think that you have these giant corporations that have the upper hand, I guess you could say, power wise, like Mitsubishi and things like this?
Absolutely, and it just keeps on going. Even recently, certain convenience stores, which is a huge business here, have been eating each other up to the state there that there's probably only four or five big ones left. There used to be maybe about 10 different, corporations taking part in the whole convenience store, and they're like every single block, every single corner has a convenience store. It's pretty amazing, even if you're from a place that has a lot of stores. So that's definitely happening. That the power is going into, over time, it's coming
Consolidate.
to,
Yeah.
into less hands. Yeah, and Mitsubishi is definitely a really, really powerful company. Of course, they're the ones that were making like the warships in the war, and they make the
Mm-hmm.
Mitsubishi Zero, which was the most advanced flying plane at the time. The Americans had to shoot them down to even retro engineer them. They had to
Mm-hmm.
shoot that. They had specific instructions just to shoot them down by the wings, so they would crash land in pretty good condition, and let the pilot crash land so they could seize the vehicle and retro engineer it to make their own the Spitfires or whatever they actually produced right after that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Quigley argues that the royal family, the imperial family, was essentially an apparatchik or an attaché of the money elite, the power elite in Japan, and he argues that pretty much the same thing happened in China with Chiang Kai-shek marrying into the dominant banking family there. And then, of course, I'm of the opinion that the Maoist revolution was, according to Bill Donovan and different people, actually funded by the West. David Rockefeller kind of talks about this. So, I mean, is that really the same thing with the imperial family in Japan? Is it just kind of like you said, with the British royal family basically being this frontispiece that actually does have power because they're tied into sort of the mega corporation networks?
Absolutely. I mean, you can. I mean, it's more obvious in Japan than almost anywhere in the whole world
Oh, is it really? Okay.
because, yeah, I mean, and the imperial family has to be one of the most powerful families in the world, and the richest too. A lot to do with.
So they're not just a figurehead in Japan; they actually do have power.
Yeah, it's a lot like the Queen of England. I mean, it's very, very
Okay,
comparable
right.
to the British royal family. They say they have no power. They say they don't have that much money,
Yeah,
but actually they have
right.
extraordinary
They're
amounts of money, and they're
billionaires, right?
billionaires. Yeah, and it has a lot to do
Okay,
with the whole Golden Lily. Where in the 30s, Japan was invading
right.
all these Asian
Okay.
countries and just stealing their money, like Burma, Korea, Taiwan,
Okay.
China. In fact,
Interesting.
in China, when they were invading Manchuria, in the Second Battalion, which is very unusual in any military, they had the safe breakers and safe crackers with the second infantry units in the front lines. So they had their first, infantry, which was like the military, and then they had the safe crackers right behind them, so they could break into all the
Uh-huh.
bank vaults and all the personal stashes that because Chinese merchants used to keep their money usually under their floorboards of their houses. So they had
Uh-huh.
experts going in and to all the merchants' houses and cracking open the floorboards and cracking their safes. And
Interesting.
that's how they had a lot of the money to fund themselves during the Second World War.
Okay.
They had all of the gold from Asia, and Asia has most of the gold in the world. Most of the natural ore deposits are in Asia. So, I mean, by the end of the war, when Japan lost the war, they had, maybe trillions of dollars worth of gold, which is why the Americans arrived there. They checked out all the bank vaults as one of the things they did in 45, and they saw how much money was there. They just couldn't believe it, and I think they struck a special deal, which is what Sterling Seagrave points out in his book, The Gold Warriors, which is a really great book. It's totally amazing. I really couldn't put that down. It totally blew my mind to see how much cash was. And he's suggesting that they had something like 40 times more gold than in Switzerland.
Interesting. Okay, now,
Making
this is
them,
kind of new to me. I think Farrell touches on this at one point somewhere, but
yeah, Joseph P. Farrell does talk about that a little bit. I think he's quite aware of that. Yeah.
Now, we also wanted to talk about the stabbings here. What is going on this week? So we're seeing the stabbings everywhere. It's not just Japan, but it seems to happen a lot in Japan for whatever reason. And then we saw stabbings in the U.S. Professor, and they're saying, a U.S. professor stabbed in London purportedly.
Oh yeah.
And they always want to say that it's ISIS. And got an ad running anyway. I was listening to Patrick Henningsen on 21st Century Wire this last Sunday, and he was talking about the stabbing of the French priest, and it got me thinking that if the events are not just completely staged, which I think is entirely feasible in at least several situations, but I thought what they also could possibly do is that anytime you have just a random attack, if the establishment wants to, they can just simply label it as an ISIS attack.
Absolutely. And they seem to be making up their minds, like in the British stabbing, that just what happened yesterday or the day before. The police, the official police word is, well, we don't really, haven't really established a motive yet, which is their classic, which means we haven't really made up the full story yet, which I think is the real case. Who are we going to blame this on? Is it going to be ISIS? Is it going to be, he's supposed to be a Somali guy who grew up in Norway, which I find extremely, hard to believe anyway.
But we had that. Even Fox News reported, of all people, that in May of I think either this year or last year, there were drills where they were having faked stabbings, and the drill participants and they didn't tell the public about this. The drill participants were saying "Allah Akbar," and it freaked everybody out. And so then here we are magically having these very events supposedly happening. And one of the things that Patrick pointed out that I think was very telling was the fact that in Arabic, as I understand, Daesh is actually a derogatory term. It's like saying scumbag or cockroach. So the fact that they're saying that and ISIS, by the way, purportedly issued a fatwa for anyone using the term. And so they're saying in the situation of the priest story that the assailants shouted out Daesh, which that would basically be like me running in to attack somebody and saying cockroach. Or retard.
Doesn't make any sense.
I kill you in the name of the retards.
Yeah, that is.
So it's absolutely ridiculous, and that's how idiotic the Western media is that they don't understand that it's actually a derogatory term in Arabic. So that right away is a giveaway that these are being if they're real events, real or not, or that they're just attacks or crimes, and they're just saying, oh, ISIS. They said Allah Akbar. And so now, what's going on with this Japanese stabbing stuff?
So I find it's very interesting. I mean, the hospital where this took place, this disabled care facility, it's owned by the Japanese government. It's ran by the Japanese government. So straight off the bat, all the witnesses are going to be working for the Japanese government. So it can be totally manipulated into saying whatever they want people to know. What's even more interesting is, of course, the timing. The guy had, according to different sources, he got there like 2:20 in the morning, broke in, tied up the employees. The stories vary between media sources, and then stabbed 20 people, 19 people to death, and a further 25 people. And then at 2:45, one of the employees who wasn't tied up, I guess, called the police, and shortly after that, he must have just left there. It must have been about 2:50, like 10 to 3 and drove to the local police station to turn himself in. And it's almost impossible to stab that many people in that short of a time, which is what some Japanese people pointed out on Twitter, which I was really glad to see that some people really got that already. Like,
no, Omar Mateen can shoot 50 people in like 5 minutes, so
yeah,
it's entirely possible. Wasn't he throwing ninja stars? I mean,
yeah, I mean it's amazing. Imagine, he would have to go from room to room, from bed to bed, just slashing necks at the highest speed that anyone's ever seen. I mean, unless you were a trained killer, you really couldn't have done that. It's just, time-wise, it's almost impossible. And so the timing seems very interesting, with Japan trying to go, solo and build up its military and change the constitution. And I just read that last week in a Tokyo high court upheld the fact that the rule that Japanese police can spy on any Muslim living in Japan, which is very strange timing-wise too. So I do feel like something's coming down the road, that there'll be another attack in Japan, and that will be attributed to Muslim terrorists, like some Muslim guy, maybe a Pakistani living in Japan who's not making that much money, and of course he loses his mind and he sets off a bomb or kills a bunch of people. So I think this knife attack, this alleged knife attack, is sort of a prelude to something coming down the road, which I'm really worried about, that will happen and everyone will be convinced of that, and then bam, they'll change the constitution maybe a week after that. I hope my predictions are wrong, but I feel like they're probably going to be correct for multiple reasons.
Well, it's interesting that why would there be multiple knife attacks across the world all of a sudden?
Yeah,
that's stupid. I mean, axe attacks too. Like, is it just copycats? I mean, so there's a spate of mass shootings, and then suddenly there's a spate of knife attacks. But
yeah,
that doesn't make sense to me. To me, it makes it suspicious.
I think it's suspicious because it ties back into these sort of fake ISIS videos where people are being beheaded, and they're using knives because they're such cavemen, and they like to ut people's heads off and all of this.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, it's more barbaric, right?
Yeah, and also, I mean, the ones in Europe, like in France or England, it's actually extremely hard to get hold of handguns because firearms are so totally illegal. Right. So in those cases, it would kind of have to be a stabbing. If they're going to do a quick fake or hoax attack, knife is really easy. Oh, he stabbed this lady. No pictures of the body, just trust us. This happened. He stabbed this person.
But globally, there's suddenly knife attacks.
Well, exactly. It just seems to fit into this whole grand scheme of we've got to stop these knife-holding cavemen, ISIS guys, and we've got to bomb them back into the Stone Age, which is actually what we've already been doing for the last, 10, 15 years. And,
now, if I do stabbing and I look at Google News, this is another point I always make, I see stabbing victim in Texas. Stabbing victim Denver, stabbing victim in Walmart somewhere in Ohio Walmart. So I see multiple stabbings, and what are we hearing about in the news? We're only hearing about the U.S. woman stabbed in London, right? And it's twisted into they're still not even saying that it was quote ISIS. But what I'm getting at is, why is that the only stabbing that matters when there's like 50 other stabbings listed here in the news?
Interesting. Yeah, it's been pushed to the top of Google searches, possibly. Yeah.
Well, it's the one that all the news sources are reporting on. New York Post, ABC News, USA Today, Telegraph, The Independent. They're all talking about the professor from Florida stabbed in London. Nobody's talking about the 50 other stabbings that are in the news here.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the big mainstream, and I always make the point to talk about how the big mainstream outlets, when they're focusing on a story, it's on purpose. I mean, they could have chosen any of these, right? But this one's on purpose. Why is that? Well, I guess we're just supposed to accept that. It's another weird thing that I meant to ask you about. Have you ever noticed the train derailing stories that come in waves?
Oh yeah, it always seem to happen in interesting.
Why do we have there'll be 3 train derails that happen within a few months every 4 or 5 years? What the fuck is up with that? It just happens all of a sudden. Now, I'm not saying that I know for sure it's fake, or I don't know, but what the heck is going on there? I mean, to me, it just suggests that a high-level coordination amongst global, not just U.S. news, but global news. What do you think?
That does seem strange. I mean, how could train drivers all over the world somehow become, very poor at their jobs all at the same time? That does seem to be sort of suspicious in its own way.
I know what it is. They all take the what's the drug that makes you into a zombie? No, that story pops up every 4 years too.
Oh yeah, yeah,
You know what I'm talking about?
yeah.
Like,
This synthetic
yeah.
substance that they've had out there with the guy eating the guy's face off. This one.
Well, that was in the news like a couple weeks ago that there's zombies again in New York because they're doing this synthetic drug. So maybe the pilots, the captains of the trains are all taking the zombie drug.
Yeah, smoking too
I
much
don't know, it'd be
spice,
ridiculous, but
the artificial marijuana, which is much worse for you than actual weed. Yeah,
oh yeah, I know. I tried that one time for the hell of it, and I almost went to the hospital.
yeah,
So
it's really
don't
good.
ever try synthetic marijuana. But
Absolutely.
now, so this is great. You know a lot about Japan. It's not an area that I'm well versed on or in, and that would include Asia as a whole. I focus a lot on the West and the Middle East in my research, but not so much Asia. I do know a good bit about Central Asia, but so maybe could you give us maybe a rundown of kind of what's happened in the 20th century in Japan, and we touched on this a little bit earlier, but is that doable for you, or is that a little too much to ask? Or
Yeah, no, sure.
seems like your forte.
I think it all goes back to the the 1870s, where in the 1850s, that's when the Americans came to Japan, and they came with ironclad ship, which Japanese had never seen before, and were very intimidated by, and they forced Japan to open up their trade to the whole world, especially to England and to the States. And after that, they knew.
So they came and said, "You're going to do free trade,
Yeah,
damn it, or else we're going to put this iron ship in your butthole."
yeah. The black ship, I think it was called Kurofune in Japanese. The black ship, they'd never seen anything like it. It was like a tank on water. And after that, they always knew that naval superiority was the way to go. And
Right.
in the 1880s, Japan did get a lot of the old British Navy, the Old Navy of England. I wonder if that's where Old Navy, the store, comes from, but the store name. But basically, England sold Japan its entire fleet as they were getting their own new fleet. And after that, it was very easy for them to start the Sino-Japanese War and the Russo-Japanese War, which, they totally defeated China in the takeover of Korea back then, because Korea was a Chinese vassal back then, and
Okay.
Japan took over from the Chinese by blocking their main port, which they were supplying their troops from. And then, of course, they had the Russo-Japanese War, which actually lasted about 45 minutes. They absolutely devastated the entire Russian Navy in 45 minutes because they had the entire British fleet, and they had sent admirals over to the British Navy naval school to learn the Western battle tactics. And of course, they had their own battle tactics from the Shogun warfare days. And, they'd always studied The Art of War by Sun Tzu, which is a very crucial book, in war studies
Sure.
in general.
Excellent. This is
Yeah,
great.
yeah.
Okay.
And
Keep going.
so then you come up to, then they took over almost all of Asia, and I think that was just basically a giant bank robbery, because they took all the gold back from, like in Burma, for example, they went from town to town, village to village, stealing all the golden Buddhas, bringing them back to Japan, and then melting them down into blocks so they couldn't be recognized in case after the war that, they were trying to claim back their possessions, so they just melted them down into gold blocks. This gave them a huge amount of cash, and they used that to further the military purposes. And they did really well in the Pacific War. If you read a lot about the war in Asia, it does seem pretty outlandish that the Americans would have won, especially as the States never really attacked Japan. They had the biggest battle was the Battle of Okinawa, which is in a southern islands, which is very far away from the Japanese mainland. And after the battle, which was extremely devastating for the local people, 1/3 of Okinawans died in that battle. That's where all the most of the Navy and Army bases are to this day. The Air Force bases are in Okinawa, which is really nowhere near Japan. It's closer to Taiwan.
Okay.
After that, the American Navy was sailing to Kyushu in the southern Japanese island, and it was almost entirely destroyed by a giant tornado, rather, which harkens back to when the Mongolians tried to invade Japan in the late 1600s, and the entire fleet of Mongolian navy was destroyed in a giant hurricane tornado.
Oh, wow.
Destroyed the whole fleet. Otherwise, Japan would have been taken over by the Mongolians. So then they called
Now, it looks like I'm taking notes here, but actually I'm just drawing pictures of Mr. Miyagi and Ralph Macchio.
it.
I'm joking, dude. I'm actually taking notes, as you can see here.
Okay, well,
So
that's fine.
keep lecturing, Professor, here. So this is great. This is new material. So absolutely. So
So there's pretty much no way that the states could impose its military might upon Japan, considering it was more or less a navy war, because besides, of course, the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, they didn't really ever attack Japan. As you know that it's considered kind of a war crime because the only people left in Hiroshima and Nagasaki would be like old people, children, women, because all the men were away in war. The majority was still stationed in Manchuria, which was a Japanese colony back then. So, if you're trying to beat a foe, really, why don't you, bomb any of their military sites, any of the factories that were making the tanks and the airplanes? They didn't attack anything. It seems extremely strange. It almost seems like there was some special agreement between the Japanese and the Americans at the time to not bomb any of their real, sensitive sites. And then you have
yes,
the Tokyo firebombing is also very interesting because that's also sort of a very devastating attack for civilians, and they totally just bombed civilian areas. They didn't bomb one military target in Tokyo, which seems extremely strange. Of course, a lot of the subverts in Japan, the political dissidents, lived in that exact area of Tokyo. So it seemed extremely convenient for the Japanese government and imperial family, who really de facto ran the country, that you'd have a lot of their political dissidents all killed in like a single day. So then after the war, when they're obviously going to revise a new country or constitution, there'd be no real, opposition left.
So potentially, then the upper crust already had a deal, and this is probably links into the idea that Pearl Harbor was a false flag too, right?
Mm-hmm.
What do you think?
I mean, definitely Pearl Harbor. They knew about Pearl Harbor. It's even in
Right.
it's even in the in old newspapers from Hawaii. Japan may attack this weekend. And
Right.
you can find that
So,
clipping online pretty easily, and that's strange. And allegedly,
well,
they even knew how many planes were coming, how many bombs were going to be dropped. I mean, the Americans knew this to that degree. I mean, it was sort of, I think a lot of these things were behind the curtains deals between the states and
yes.
Japan to actually invite each other into certain battles and wars to then set the stage for this, whole
Exactly.
scenario.
That's what I was going to say. That's what seems to be the pattern I'm noticing in this 20th century with the UK and Hitler.
Absolutely.
They actually, the Royal Society elites, the Astors, Clive said, they actually sent messages to Hitler that they wanted him to annex Austria and to move into Czechoslovakia. And they said, we're not going to support anybody who opposes Hitler's moves, because they'd already made this deal with him to do this. And what that suggests to me is exactly the same pattern of what you're saying there, is that they wanted these events to happen in the theater of war to give a pretext to have a level of skirmish by which the predetermined outcomes could already be put into play. That's what I seem to be getting here.
Absolutely. I think the situation between UK and Germany in the Second World War is very similar between the Americans and the Japanese. And of course, the Japanese and the Brits were always allies before that. I mean, all the way up to the invasion of Burma, probably. And so it seems extremely strange that, of course, the States and the UK would be huge allies during the war.
Absolutely.
So
right.
why would they be fighting their allies' main ally? And it just
what's interesting is that I wanted to bring this up too, because I think it ties into it. I don't want to get too off topic with Japanese history because it's really good what you're saying. But I've been reading Servando Gonzalez's book on psychological warfare in the New World Order, and he has really extensive analyses of Cuba. And it looks like the same pattern in the Cold War, when there was all these opportunities that they could have gotten rid of Castro, the supposed villain, that they never took advantage of. These stories about 50 attempts to kill Castro with exploding conch shells and cigars that exploded, that's all completely preposterous. I mean, the U.S. has the ability to go out and remove dictators anywhere they want for the most part, yet they can't go remove the guy of this tiny little island under the pretext of the supposed nukes that are there. But the nukes that are there, the only basis for that story that the Soviets put nukes there is this imagery that JFK held up that's supposed to be from satellites that the Soviets put nukes there. So what Gonzalez's thesis, interestingly, and there's a lot more arguments that he used the argument that why was Castro aiding the United Fruit Company, I believe, in fighting Salvador Allende. So you have Castro fighting Allende, this other supposed leftist Democrat, because Allende wasn't radical enough in his communism. So what happens? Well, Castro is enabled to stay down there as a boogeyman to roll out at any time, just like Kim Jong-un and Kim Jong-il appear to be boogeymen that they can roll out at any time. Absolutely. And most ridiculous of all, why would you... The Bay of Pigs invasion makes no sense. It actually makes more sense as in terms of aiding the CIA. Gonzalez's thesis is, I think he's right, because there's a freaking base already there called Guantanamo.
Yeah.
Like, wouldn't you launch an invasion from your fucking base? I mean, it's utterly retarded unless, just like in these situations, Castro is a CFR man.
Absolutely.
What do you think?
I think, Cuba does reflect North Korea quite closely in that regard, because, why would, the entire U.S. Army and South Korea Army, which is extremely well equipped, and the JTI, the Japanese Self-Defense Force, just sit there while these crazies are right there next to them with nuclear weapons, allegedly.
Yeah.
I don't know if you saw the news. It was like 3 days ago. North Korea launched another rocket towards Japan. This is what they do every couple of years: is they launch a rocket that lands in the ocean. And of course, even though 2016 now, there's no footage of it. I mean, show us a satellite. So show us a satellite photograph, or show us, the Navy retrieving the body of the rocket from the ocean. Show us something. But just
that shows the large scale coordination that we were talking about potentially with the stabbings and the train derailment stories.
Yeah.
Look at the large scale cooperation about news regarding North Korea.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you and I have been talking about this for a long time. Like those AP photos of the North Korean nukes and the space program, they're a joke. Ridiculous. They look like a B movie or worse. It's Mystery Science Theater up in here, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, those photographs were extraordinarily fake looking. They're just desperate to get some sort of imagery out there, I suppose, that proves that they have this sort of military capability. But of course, with half the population starving at times over the last 20 years, it seems like they would never even have the money to do that with.
Well, the images show literally like Commodore 64s. So, I mean, come on. Are you launching nukes from Commodore 64s? I don't know. Maybe the ICBM technology from the 60s that the U.S. or the Russians had. Is that what the North Koreans have? And I don't know. It doesn't make any sense. But it does make sense if a lot of these so-called boogeymen play a role that they're designed to play. And that makes sense to me because it's not really nation states that run things. It's the corporations that are international and the banking elite that are international that have the nation state, the national governments function as kind of fronts. At least that's the way I view it.
Absolutely. I mean, and now it seems like North Korea is the only place left that is this kind of crazy, potentially nuke-holding country because of the policy change towards Cuba from the United States through Obama. It seems they were going to be friends now, or whatever. You can, excuse me, travel.
Well, that's probably because the threat that Castro was supposed to hold in the Cold War doesn't really work much anymore. Maybe, I'm guessing. I don't know.
Absolutely.
Does he really function as that much of a boogeyman anymore?
Right. I mean, and then there's the relationship between, Kim Jong-un's family and the imperial family here in Japan, which is they're most likely blood related to each other. So that would seem extremely convenient for keeping this sort of despot in power for as long as possible, so that they can build up their military. And, they plan as we know, they plan in terms of 50, 60 years in advance, if not hundreds of years. And in Japan, because it's such an ancient country and culture in a way that 100 years is really not a long time. And people live to be over 90 years old very, very commonly, So, I mean, most people's grandmas are over 90. So just the concept of time is kind of slightly different here, too. They think much more in advance. And so, were they planning that all along? Probably, to keep this North Korea in power. I mean, the irony is, after the Korean War, South Korea was a military dictatorship all the way up to about 1989, and you had people escaping South Korea to go to North Korea to get to live in freedom. So there's kind of interesting stories there in the 1950s, 60s of all these South Koreans escaping up to the north to get to get away from the military dictatorship.
So you took us up to World War II and the idea that perhaps the imperial family might have had some deal that was already made for the outcome of World War II with the West. Take us from there further if you have insight on that, because how does Japan benefit from that? Is it just looking at and seeing the way things are going, that globalism is the future, we got to be a part of this? Is it just pragmatic on the part of the upper crust of Japan?
Absolutely. I mean, in Japan, they do see themselves as kind of as Europeans, which is strange when you're thinking of from the Western point of view, where they seem extremely Asian, of course. But it is extremely wealthy country. I mean, you've probably never seen such wealth in your life. It's absolutely unreal, the amount of money that's here. It's just baffling. I mean, even if you've been to, I grew up in Germany, spent a lot of time in Switzerland, these really, really wealthy nations, and it's above that. And so people talk a lot about the economic miracle after the war.
Right.
The miracle would come from the belief that Japan was totally destroyed and its industry was destroyed after the war. But of course, they never attacked the Japanese industry. They didn't bomb the Mitsubishi factories where they're making the aircraft and the carriers and all that. So they were in perfect condition by the end of the war in 1945. And where this economic miracle comes from is they had all this gold that they stole from Asia for so many years. They spent like 15, 20 years stealing like almost every single valuable thing. Like in Korea, they went throughout the towns and villages taking all the, because in Korea they used to put the huge diamonds in the foreheads of Buddhas. And they would systematically go around stealing all these diamonds, which was shocking to Koreans, I think, on a basic level, of that Buddhism comes from Korea to Japan. It was given to a Japanese emperor as a birthday present, actually. They introduced the philosophy of Buddhism, and the oldest statues in Kyoto, I think, of Buddhas are Korean. So I think that was just very shocking.
Now they stole the golden Buddhas, but did they steal the DVDs of Little Buddha with Keanu Reeves?
No, they left those all.
Whoa.
That's a good point. Yeah, so I mean, the economic miracle coming up to the 1950s, it's not so much a miracle as just, common sense in business, that they had billions of dollars to start with. Some people erroneously believe that, the Americans in the West, helped them set up and, gave them some loans. So they didn't need anybody's money. They pretty much bribed the states off with this huge amount of gold that they had, which is then, was used by a CIA slush fund, which then probably funded every single CIA action for the next 50 years in the States. The CIA would have had no money if it wasn't for all this gold that they received in Japan in the 40s and then throughout the 50s, and they put it into a hidden bank account. And so everything that, the CIA have done, you could actually attribute to the Japanese and Japanese gold, which is very interesting. I mean, where else would the CIA get all this money from? The States didn't really have that much money compared to Japan. And so Sterling Seagrave in his book Gold Warriors does suggest that, with a huge amount of proof. His footnotes are amazing. You've never seen so many references in your life. I mean, the stuff is solid. That the CIA took probably half of that money and then kept quiet.
So my understanding is you've got like Rockefeller money that starts the CIA, the OSS and CIA.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the same money that we're talking about here?
Well, I think the OSS and CIA were started with their own cash, but I mean, probably anything after 45, 46 was heavily funded with this giant slush fund that they had come across in Japan. So then you got coming up to the 1950s, and by 1954, I think Japan's already the second biggest economy in the world, which is only supposed to be 9 years after it was totally devastated. This would be impossible for any actual country that really was fully devastated in a war.
Yeah, exactly right.
What seems strange too is the earthquakes that have happened over the years. And of course, you might remember the Kobe earthquake from 1997, I believe. And that was, of course, Kobe is one of the biggest manufacturing centers in Japan. So that was people have suggested that was also an artificial earthquake, maybe one of the first ones uh, in the history, possibly, as an actual sort of weaponized earthquake. And so that really destroyed a lot of Kobe's infrastructure because it was such a violent earthquake. And so what seems weird is that during the actual war, they bombed Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and they firebombed Tokyo, hitting no real targets. But then later on, this natural, act of God earthquake hits Kobe, which is the manufacturing center in Kansai here in western Japan. And then another one hits the breadbasket of Japan. Those seem like actual, true military targets. Those are the kind of places you want to bomb in the world.
Right, places that would be manufactured that hit their economy. But who do you think might be behind that? Like who would gain from that?
It's hard to say. I mean, I think they were always trying to keep Japan in check because the states knew how much money they had. They didn't let anyone really know about it because then that would be exposing the whole Second World War secret, which is that they never really won the war. For example, most people don't know that the little of the Navy that was left after the war, the U.S. Navy, was, I think in 1947, was melted down to make Mitsubishi and Nissan cars to then sell to the rest of the world. I think very few people are aware of that, and that always struck me as extremely interesting. How would you keep your naval superiority over the Japanese when half your navy was destroyed in this giant typhoon, and the other half was melted down for cars?
Interesting.
Yeah, it seems extremely spurious.
Now, you also mentioned to me in the last year or two the creation of a new intelligence service in Japan. How does that fit into this, you think? Does that fit into this facade of what you were talking about earlier, of the stabbings and so forth, and a potential future, quote, terror attacks that, we'll see, we need all this surveillance, we need the new security agencies because of all the terror that's coming?
Yeah, I think it was sort of, having that in mind, I think they did create a new Secret Service here. I mean, they've always had the Secret Service here since the 40s, which is more or less the CIA. They're totally embedded the CIA. You may well know, I think you do have mentioned it before, that in Korea, they're just called the KCIA, the Korean CIA. So they're very much hand in hand with the US CIA. And I think that's what was going on here. And the establishment of the new Secret Service was just probably to make way for these new events that are happening right now, which is, global terrorism,
exactly,
and all of this stuff. I mean, that's, you might know about the worst aviation disaster in history was JAL 123, which was a Japanese airliner which was crashed in the mountains of Japan here in 1988, 89. And a lot of people have suggested, and there is a book in Japan available, that it was actually shot down. There was supposed to be no survivors. It was very devastating, but actually one girl survived, which is extraordinarily unusual because the plane looks like it was shot down. And she describes what seems to be in line with a rocket approaching the plane and exploding. And this is only about a year after Japan's economy was in such a boom. I mean, in the 1980s, the cash flow here it's just insane. It actually boggles my mind how much money was going through people's hands and how much money people were spending on certain luxury items and so on. It said that in 1987, the Imperial Garden Palace, the Imperial Palace in Tokyo, is like a large, pretty medium-sized park where they have the Imperial Palace where the emperor lives, and you can see it from satellite pictures and Google Images and whatever. It's not very big, but that was said to be the same value as the entire state of California.
Interesting.
Which is a huge amount of money.
Well, yeah.
So I think the Americans were extremely intimidated by that, and allegedly had threatened Japan, well, we're going to do something if you don't, lower your interest rates or just chill out with your entire economy here. And then, of course, this plane crashed. It was like the worst crash in aviation history to this date, I believe.
Now,
so some people seem to see it as a one.
A few years ago, we discussed was it Oceania Airlines or Asia Airlines? What was the one that?
Oh yeah, Asiana.
So preposterous.
Yeah.
Asiana Airlines.
Oh yeah. Todd, I've totally forgotten about that one now. There's just so much fakery with different airlines and crashes.
Isn't that weird? Yeah, and the whole Malaysian fiasco that we've seen in the past couple of years, disappearing planes, give me a break.
Yeah.
And TWA Flight 800, which there's all these theories about that from 1996, the one that was perhaps missiled or blew up, supposedly. And it's been my contention that if you look at the history of the rise of international airlines, that was always in concert with the CIA, Howard Hughes, and all that. That's even shown in the film version of Howard Hughes' life with Leonardo DiCaprio, the Martin Scorsese film, The Navigator. So from the outset, you've had the CIA have its hand in airlines, and that makes sense because this is a transnational, global way to transport things, right? I mean, it's going to be used by useful to intelligence agencies. It'd be useful for anything to drug trafficking or anything else. So I am immediately suspicious anytime I see airplane fiascos, just because that's a phenomenon that's I think about Air America, I think about Evergreen Airlines. Those are specific CIA airlines, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't know if you have any insights or thoughts on how you think all this. I mean, obviously, an air disaster is a great way. It has multiple uses as well. It can negatively affect tourism in a certain region. You can pin the blame on some terror group. You can take care of some person that you want to target, right? Like you want to kill a person on the flight. Mm-hmm. It has many uses, obviously, but I think that it's another angle on the coordination that we've been talking about in the news articles, that you can also perhaps see how this could be applied to airlines, because the airlines are global as well.
Absolutely. I mean, every time I see some news related to some airline crashing, going missing, I find that's extremely strange. It's been a classic.
How does an airplane go missing, given the capabilities that we have in our day? I mean, right. The NSA can spy on anybody's phone, but they lose airplanes. I mean, that's completely preposterous. That's like, you can't find Bin Laden. The Pentagon can't find Bin Laden, but Anderson Cooper can go, interview these people. I mean, it's completely ludicrous.
Right, absolutely. I mean, it seems strange. It seems also the perfect way to take people out, like Senator Wellstone in the States. I think it's been proven beyond a doubt that his plane was really, taken out of the air. And then you had JFK Jr., of course, who they didn't really want around for the future. His plane magically crashed too, even though he was an expert pilot. And it all seems very strange. It's definitely a way of taking a lot of people out at one time. And of course, ever since 9/11, it just invokes memories of terrorism and sort of mass fear about,
Right. I'm of the opinion that there was no flight, that we're not even looking at a real crash scene with Flight 93, is it? In Pennsylvania. It's just like some pieces of garbage on the ground.
Yeah, I mean, that seemed like it wasn't a plane there. It seems like there was no plane involved in the DC attack either. There doesn't seem to be any real plane debris there. That
agreed. Yeah,
people often think that was a missile. Probably was. I mean, were any planes used on the day at all? There seems to be a lot of proof towards the fact that nobody in New York City saw any planes flying towards the World Trade Centers. Well, that would be extremely strange, considering it's supposed to be this, world famous hijacked plane suicide attempt. And of course, planes can't fly that fast. Boeing 737-200, they can't fly at that speed, at that altitude, and so how would it even fly at that speed to hit the towers like that? There's a lot of unanswered questions in there, anyway.
Right. Can you tell us any more about what you brought us up to, like the 50s and 60s in Japan? Can you bring us further into the 70s and 80s and the present day? Because I think that we get so focused if we're looking at geopolitics, or if we're looking at the history of the 20th century. We think about the Atlantis power block, we think of Russia or China, and we may overlook Japan. So could you, for example, when did Japan adopt? I've heard some lectures on this, but the date escapes me. But there was a certain point where Japan adopted the Federal Reserve model that the U.S. and the rest of the world have, according to that Rothschild central bank model. Do you have any insight on that? When Japan kind of went with that same scam model?
Yeah, I'm not sure of the exact dates of when that happened, but I mean, does seem to follow that that's what they would go with, what the States is going with. They just go with whatever they say to kind of keep quiet and keep in the background. And yeah, I don't think they had any way to resist that change, considering the relationship between them and the States. They have untold amounts of cash in their banks, so it would be perfect for them to become part of the international banking cartel.
Mm-hmm.
And with this secret money from the 30s and 40s, they would have no way out of resisting that, because otherwise the Americans would have something on them, or they could release some files about what they did in the Second World War or whatever. Probably a lot of blackmail going both ways. I mean, it's just, as we know, money is power, and if money is power, which I know we all believe to be true, we know it's true, Japan's just simply one of the most powerful countries in the world because they have the most money. And that's no doubt why they want to have an independent military, too, that can be active, and they'd have to change the constitution to do that, which they're really on road to doing right now. And so, I mean, even the first Gulf War was sponsored mainly by Japan. A lot of people don't know that.
Oh, no, I didn't know that.
So that essentially was probably like a Japanese war. I mean, I think essentially what they were doing after the Second World War is they just realized, we're not going to use our army to fight anymore. We're going to use the Americans to fight, which is kind of what the Brits do. The Brits wanted to invade Iraq and Afghanistan. They used the American army to do that, because in England, people tend to not join the military. They'd rather, sit around smoking weed and having a good time going out. They're more or less, pacifists and quite intellectual, and they don't want to die in some war like it's 1945. So they use the States as a proxy army. And I think they were using the States as a proxy army in the Korean War, because Japan couldn't exactly go and invade Korea, or could it, right after losing the war. So great, let's get the Americans to go in there and do it for us. And they benefited greatly from that and the outcomes.
Yeah, it's interesting. You don't usually hear it posited that Japan is a powerful player that can manipulate. But how would that be the case, given that you're saying that they also do things to keep Japan in check?
That's, yes.
I mean, how is it?
It is quite complex. Spent quite a long time thinking about that. I think Japan's allowed to be powerful to a certain degree, and once they get too powerful, then the States puts them back in check again. But I think we're getting to a stage right now where they're going to go a lot more independent, and it's going to be some interesting things coming down the line here, with the appointing of these new ministers and the new government here, and Japan is just ready to go solo, really. I don't know how that's going to affect the relationship between their the military and the Japanese military and the American military, but something's going to change for sure. Whenever I just got to think, whenever they invade another country, I believe Japan will be right there with them in an active role. And that's what's kind of worrying to a lot of people here, because, they really bought the whole pacifism thing. Japanese people are very, very peaceful. Like on a day-to-day, you never see any fights. There's no crime, more or less no crime. There's no street crime. People leave their at the front of their house unlocked. They leave their luxury cars unlocked. So it seems very strange, and it seems to clash with sort of regular Japanese culture.
Well, now here's a question. So we hear about black markets and gangs and so forth in Japan. I've known musicians that have played in Japan and talked about how they kind of had to get okay from like Yakuza or something to play in a certain area. That could be bullshit. I don't know if that's true, but that's what this person said. So I'm wondering, like, how does the not much crime fit with the claims of there being kind of cartels and black market gangs?
That's what's interesting. There's just more or less there's no petty level crime. The big crime,
not violent crime.
No, yeah, the organized crime is extremely organized and extremely
So it's business, basically.
Yeah, big time. I mean, you see the gangsters here that they're dressed in a 3-piece Italian suit. They're not wearing jeans or anything like casual like that. And the reason they don't involve themselves in petty crime is that they're too busy making millions, so they wouldn't want to. And also, people have told me over the years that the reason that the streets are so safe is not so much because of the police, because you can see the police, they look like Safeway security guards. They don't really do or say much of anything. They don't carry weapons. They're not really trained to fight, or they struggle to arrest people whenever they do that. It's more or less because if someone snatches a purse and runs down the street, the Yakuza will get you. They'll stop you right in your tracks, give you a
So
little
how does that
beating.
work in terms of drug trade? Because I'm assuming that there's at least a facade of drugs being illegal, and presumably the gangs that run the drug trade.
Mhm.
How does this work? If,
That's quite complex in itself. I suppose that a lot of the drugs here, this the methamphetamine, which is the main drug of choice that's available out there, or it seems to be produced in factories in North Korea, and somehow it siphons its way down into Japan and then is controlled very much by the Yakuza. Of course, methamphetamine use here has been quite prevalent since the 1890s, and they used to use it a lot in the war. They used to give it to their soldiers to stay up all night, and this used to baffle the American military sometimes when they thought they would stake out certain islands during the Pacific War, and they used to think like, wow, these guys are on watch all the time. They must have 2,000-3,000 troops on this island. But in actual fact, they'd have about 300 troops. They're just all on speed, and so they would always keep watch, and they're like, wow, these guys must be changing watch, and they must have all these troops there. They were on a very powerful kind of methamphetamine. Also, the kamikaze, pilots who sacrificed themselves by crashing into certain, important sites. Naval vessels. They were almost 100%. They were always on speed.
yeah, I have heard that. Here's a question. So, for example, Quigley's section on China prior to World War II, he talks about Sun Yat-sen and his democratization, supposedly. But Sun Yat-sen, it was a Mason, and there's speculation that the triads might have connections to Freemasonry and older secret societies in China. And so I'm curious, in terms of Japan, what's the influence of Freemasonry in Japanese politics and business?
Yeah, I believe that most major politicians and businessmen are Masons here. There's absolutely no doubt. And, you can see the Tokyo Freemasonic Temple is quite well known about. I mean, in the last 10 years, especially, Japanese people have really woken up to that, online. And they think and talk a lot about Freemasonry. They're like, wow, this secret group from the West that somehow, set themselves up here. The first Freemasonic lodge here was actually set up by the Irish in the 1860s. So the Yokohama Lodge, the Sphinx Lodge, was set up at Irish Constitution. So that would be coming out of Dublin, Ireland. From there, the Mother Lodge, the Freemasonic Hall, which is really surprising to me because I was born in Ireland. I grew up there till the age of 10, and so I found that extremely interesting. I was assuming for sure it would be like the Brits or the Dutch, but Masonry has been big since the 1880s, and many Japanese influential characters throughout history have been Masons. I believe probably the entire imperial family and almost all the politicians. And of course, you see the politicians every time they're on campaign. It's just tradition to wear white gloves. Of course, they look just like the white gloves that Masons wear in their rituals. So
Michael Jackson.
Yeah, Michael Jackson glove. So it's funny, every time you see them campaigning, they're wearing these white gloves, and it's just like, wow, that's a totally Freemasonic symbol,
Wow, this is a wealth of stuff. You're talking about like all the stuff I have no idea about. So this is interesting. Okay, excellent. I've got another show I got to do in 15 minutes. So
Oh yeah.
anything you want to leave us with here? This is a really good talk. Any other tips, insights, tidbits that you think are relevant?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure right now.
Well, that's okay. You don't have to. If anybody's interested, they can, research this stuff further. I'm definitely going to get the Sterling Seagrave book because that's right up my alley. And if you want to, you don't have to, but do you have, I know you do produce a lot of videos and stuff. Do you want to promote your site, your work?
Yeah, I don't really have a site as such, but I was thinking of doing making this interview into a little video, putting up onto YouTube with sort of appropriate imagery.
Cool.
Yeah, I'm not as advanced as yourself. I don't have a website myself. I just kind of dedicate a lot of my time to research and so on because I always want to know what's really going on. Being that.
I thought didn't you produce some music videos at one time?
Yeah, I've done music videos in the past and so on. I've never done anything really political or anything about sort of revisionist history. But I've always
Right.
been very interested in that since being a child. As my dad is from Northern Ireland, and we used to travel a lot because my parents are missionaries, and so traveling around in the 1980s when the Civil War in Ireland was on full on. Just so happened my dad is from Strabane in Northern Ireland, which is where like 95% of the IRA was from. So every time we used to go
I was
around,
going to ask about the IRA. That's interesting.
mm, every time we were traveling, especially through London, which is the major hub in Europe, it would always be stopped, for sometimes up to half an hour or an hour and be questioned because of his place of birth on his passport. And, they're more or less assuming that he might be an IRA terrorist, secretly traveling around under the guise of being a missionary. So, I always grew up with the...
Meanwhile, the British intelligence is who did all the false flags with the IRA, right?
Absolutely.
Or many of them.
Absolutely. Anything involving civilian death was more or less through the MI6, MI5. Because the IRA had no interest in killing civilians, so their whole point was getting everyone on their side. So it really hurts your cause when you blow up bars and pubs and
your own
cafes.
People, yeah, that doesn't make any sense. You might know about this. This is something I was looking at recently. And if you don't, that's cool, but it just occurred to me. I was reading and looking at the history of Whitey Bulger.
Mm.
And there's this weird story, and I'm trying to figure out if it's fake or not, that part of the money that Whitey Bulger was making in concert with his teaming up with the FBI, by the way, there's this story that he was arming the IRA. Do you have any idea if that's true, or if the FBI just kind of made that up?
As far as I know, that was probably true because the IRA was pretty desperate to get their hands on any kind of weaponry, and because of the sort of Irish pride of the East Coast Irish mafia, I think they just took advantage of that, and they kind of turned a blind eye to where he might have gotten the money from, and accepted shiploads full of weapons for their cause. The irony of that was that a lot of Irish Americans from Boston, Chicago, New York contributed money to the IRA. But what a lot of those people probably didn't know is, being patriots and so on, is that they turned around and gave a bunch of that money to the PFLA and the PLO in Palestine because they saw the Palestinian resistance as sort of their brothers. So I don't think they knew that a lot of some of those weapons and a lot of some of the cash ended up in Lebanon, in Palestine, and they used some of that money also to contribute to the weaponry to the ANC in South Africa, which is how the ANC stopped the apartheid troops from coming into the townships at night because they were just coming in truckloads and killing people at night. And so they contributed the landmines to them. So they laid landmines on the road to blow up the apartheid trucks, which then led to the sort of Nelson Mandela and the sort of the freedom of South Africa. You could quite contribute that to IRA involvement also.
Well, I'm interested in that because in Dorrell's book on MI6, he claims that Mandela was an MI6 asset. Have you heard of that?
Yeah, I have heard of that, and I think it's probably quite real. It seems it's really strange. Yeah, it seems like once he was obviously going to be the choice, for future South Africa, I think the MI6 got in there early, and he's not really the character that history is portraying him as either. He sort of has a lot of skeletons in the closet as such.
And so often that's the case that we see that, it's not really, history is not really, these personages are created celebrities. For example, I don't know if this is true, but I've seen some interesting theories that Gandhi was also kind of a British agent, that he actually pacified Indian resistance to the British.
Absolutely.
And that, I don't know what you think about that.
I think that's absolutely true. My Pakistani friends in the UK have told me about the fact that he was in the British colonial army in South Africa, shooting Africans. So, the guy had killed like 20, 30 people by the time he claimed to be such a harbinger of peace and love. So that seems strange that he has actually shot human beings before, And suddenly he's wearing a towel and he's walking around talking about, just peaceful resistance. I think he definitely was a character used to tame the Indians rather than to rile them up, because if they had a different character, maybe a natural leader at that time, they might have really rebelled against the Brits and really thrown them out, altogether.
Right.